They've pulled off the greatest intellectual heist in human history, and most people are still sleepwalking through the lie. Long before your textbooks were printed, long before entire school systems were engineered to teach a carefully curated version of civilization, a very different truth was etched into the record, one so powerful, so undeniable, that entire empires spent centuries trying to smother it. This truth never disappeared. It sank beneath the surface, layer by layer, generation by generation, under rewritten histories, sanitized narratives, and the quiet manipulation of what you are allowed to learn. But buried truths have a way of rising, and now the question becomes, if this much was stolen from your understanding, how much of your reality was built on the theft? In 440 BCE, the Greek historian Herodotus left behind a confession so explosive that later scholars would spend generations trying to smother it. In his own handwriting, he admitted that Greece did not birth its knowledge, it stole it. He wrote that the names of nearly all the Greek gods came to Greece from Egypt. He admitted the foundation of Greek thought was African. By 1785, terrified European historians began the cover-up. They scrubbed confessions from curricula, rewrote timelines, and engineered the colossal myth of the Greek miracle, a lie so polished that it still stalks your history books today. But the ruins they couldn't burn still speak. Towering African scientific academies, mathematical papyri older than Greece itself, philosophical systems carved into stone hundreds of years before a single Greek philosopher existed, weathered limestone temples, their geometry and engineering centuries ahead stand as silent witnesses, accusing, undeniable, unbroken. What you're about to see does more than challenge the official story. It obliterates it. The archaeology, the mathematics, the written confessions, yes, the Greeks' own words, reveal a truth darker than anything you were ever taught. Africa, not Greece, built the foundation of Western knowledge, and a centuries-long operation has worked tirelessly to keep this truth out of your hands. The only question now is this: are you prepared to uncover the knowledge they spent centuries burying in the dark? While Europe was still struggling through primitive settlements, African minds were mapping the stars with eerie precision. Long before Greece existed, the Ishango bone, carved with advanced mathematical patterns and dated to 20,000 BCE, recorded a level of knowledge that modern scholars still can't fully explain. This isn't a theory. This isn't a myth. This is carbon-dated evidence. The kind of truth powerful institutions prayed you would never see. The Greeks' own historical records betray the lies you've been fed. In a moment of stunning honesty, Plato transcribes an Egyptian priest's brutal assessment of Greek knowledge in his work Timaeus. You Greeks are mere children, intellectually young. There is no old opinion handed down among you by ancient tradition, nor any science hoary with age. These words weren't hidden. They were placed in plain sight, banking on your educators never revealing them to you. Herodotus didn't just casually mention Egyptian influence. He documented it extensively. He wrote, "Almost all the names of the gods came to Greece from Egypt." The Egyptians were the first to introduce solemn assemblies, processions, and litanies to the gods, and the Greeks learned from them. This isn't a minor footnote. It's a Greek confession that their entire religious foundation came from Africa. Aristotle himself acknowledged Egyptian mathematical achievements. Diodorus Siculus, another Greek historian, wrote around 60 BCE that Greek philosophers like Pythagoras, Plato, and Solon all studied in Egypt and incorporated Egyptian ideas into their own thinking. These aren't obscure texts. They're foundational Greek writings deliberately omitted from your education. The 1798 discovery of the Rosetta Stone triggered panic in European academic circles. As scholars began deciphering ancient African texts, they uncovered a devastating truth. Every philosophical and mathematical innovation attributed to Greeks had existed in Africa thousands of years earlier. What followed was a calculated, coordinated campaign to bury these connections beneath layers of academic distortion. The truth you're discovering right now has been deliberately kept from you, buried beneath centuries of historical manipulation. At Black Stories Untold, We're excavating these hidden realities about African intellectual dominance throughout history. Hit subscribe now to join us in exposing these buried truths and help dismantle the historical fabrications that have shaped your understanding of civilization. Now, let's dig deeper. While your history books glorify Athens' primitive schools, they deliberately conceal the temple complex at Waset, Thebes, the world's first true university. This sprawling African intellectual center was producing advanced scholars 2,500 years before Athens had its first school. The evidence stands in stone, and it still remains conspicuously absent from your education. These weren't simple temples. They were comprehensive educational institutions. The Temple of Waset contained specialized chambers for astronomy, medicine, mathematics, and religious instruction. Inscriptions detail how students progressed through levels of learning, from basic principles to advanced knowledge reserved for initiates. The architectural layout itself served educational purposes, with astronomical alignments and mathematical proportions embedded in the structures themselves. African libraries housed tens of thousands of papyri scrolls, while Greek society remained functionally illiterate. The Temple of Horus at Edfu still bears inscriptions describing its massive house of books, containing texts on subjects from surgical procedures to astronomical calculations. These weren't primitive collections. They were vast repositories of knowledge that Greek students traveled thousands of miles to access. The library at Alexandria, later burned and its African origins obscured, was the inheritor of this tradition of massive African knowledge repositories. Before its destruction, it contained over 700,000 scrolls, many transferred from older African temple libraries. The fall of this library was more than a tragedy. It's the first deliberate strike in the long campaign to wipe out Africa's intellectual inheritance. The archaeological record exposes the lie. Inscriptions carved into African monuments record the names of foreign students, including Greeks, who journeyed to study at these ancient academies. But modern textbooks portray Greek thinkers as isolated geniuses who developed ideas in a vacuum, a fabrication designed to sever the African roots of Western knowledge. The Rhine mathematical papyrus destroys the Greek origin myth with unsettling clarity. Written around 1650 BCE, 1,000 years before Greek mathematics was even supposed to exist, this African document solves equations and geometric problems that Greek scholars would later parade as their own revolutionary insights. The evidence remained in plain sight, ignored with purpose, not by accident. This papyrus contains 84 mathematical problems and their solutions, including methods for finding the area of a circle, the volume of a truncated pyramid, and techniques for solving what we now call algebraic equations. It demonstrates a sophisticated understanding of fractions, proportions, and geometric principles long before such concepts appeared in Greece. African mathematicians didn't just approximate pi, they calculated it to an accuracy of 3.16, remarkably close to its actual value over 1,000 years before Greek attempts. The Moscow Mathematical Papyrus reveals Africans solving complex equations for the volumes of truncated pyramids and hemispheres, while Greek society was still figuring out basic counting. The timeline exposes the lie. The so-called Pythagorean theorem appears fully formed in African mathematical texts dated to 1800 BCE, 12 centuries before Pythagoras drew his first breath. African engineers applied these principles to create perfectly aligned monuments and precisely oriented temples millennia before the first Greek structure was conceived. The evidence doesn't suggest influence, it proves direct appropriation. The Great Pyramid at Giza, built around 2560 BCE, incorporates the mathematical constant pi in its dimensions, with the ratio of its perimeter to its height equaling exactly 2 pi. Its builders achieved perfect cardinal orientation with an error margin of less than 1/10 of a degree, a feat requiring sophisticated astronomical knowledge and mathematical precision 2,000 years before Greek mathematics supposedly developed. African astronomical calculations were equally advanced. They created a 365.25-day calendar, accounting for the extra quarter day that causes leap years, thousands of years before the Greeks. The astronomical ceiling at Dendera shows precise star charts and celestial knowledge that wouldn't be discovered in Europe until the Renaissance. This knowledge didn't evolve independently in Greece. It transferred directly from African sources. While Greek philosophy is praised as humanity's first moral awakening, African records expose a far older truth. The concept of ma'at, a fully developed philosophy of truth, balance, justice, and harmony, was codified in Africa by 3000 BCE, laying out an ethical system 2,500 years before Greek ethics supposedly appeared. The timeline alone cracks the illusion wide open. The maxims of Ptahhotep, written around 2350 BCE, present a complex system of ethics and social philosophy that includes concepts of justice, truth-telling, humility, and proper conduct, all elements that would later emerge in Greek philosophical thought. This text predates Greek philosophical writings by nearly 2,000 years, but is conspicuously absent from Western philosophy courses. The 42 declarations of innocence in the Egyptian Book of the Dead established moral principles and ethical codes that would later mysteriously emerge in Greek philosophical works. These weren't vague similar ideas. They were specific ethical concepts repackaged and presented to the world as original Greek thought, while their African origins were systematically erased. I have not committed sins against people. I have not mistreated cattle. I have not committed murder. I have not told lies. These declarations from the Book of the Dead mirror concepts that would later appear in Greek ethics and even the Ten Commandments. The similarities are too precise to be coincidental. They represent direct knowledge transfer that has been deliberately obscured. The African sage Imhotep was practicing advanced medicine, architecture, and philosophy in 2650 BCE, more than 2 millennia before Hippocrates was born. Yet Western education systems begin medical history with Hippocrates, architectural history with the Greeks, and philosophical history with Socrates, completing the calculated erasure of the African originators who came thousands of years earlier. Imhotep wasn't just a philosophical figure. He was history's first known physician, architect, and astronomer whose achievements were so significant that he was later deified. His medical treatments were recorded on papyri that show knowledge of over 200 anatomical terms, surgical procedures, and treatments for numerous diseases. This medical knowledge would later reappear in Greek medical texts, stripped of its African origins. The architectural record stands in stone, refusing to bow to the story the world was taught. Long before Greece raised its first temple around 600 BCE, Africa had already mastered the very designs Greece would later claim as its own. Karnak, Luxor, Abu Simbel. These ancient African complexes carried the columns, proportions, and sacred geometry that appeared in Greece nearly 2,000 years later, repackaged as revolutionary breakthroughs. Place the Temple of Horus at Edfu beside the Parthenon, and the truth becomes impossible to deny. The columns, the symmetry, the layout. These are not coincidences. They are copies. Architectural textbooks still open with Greece as the starting point, carefully bypassing the African templates that predate and directly inspire every so-called Greek innovation. What scholars call the Doric, Ionic, and Corinthian orders are simply renamed African designs. The papyrus column becomes the Ionic, the lotus column becomes the Corinthian. The grand pillars of Karnak prefigure the Doric. Even the golden ratio and sacred geometry celebrated as the pinnacle of Greek genius were already embedded into African structures thousands of years earlier, visible most clearly in the precise proportions of the Great Pyramid. And the overlap does not end with stone. Greek religion emerges as a shadow, an echo of older African spiritual systems. Zeus mirrors Amun, Athena mirrors Neith, Apollo mirrors Horus, Aphrodite mirrors Hathor, Hermes mirrors Thoth, Even Greek ideas of the afterlife are diluted adaptations of African frameworks written millennia before Greece existed. These parallels aren't vague, they are direct transfers, stripped of their origin and repainted as European inventions. This theft did not end in antiquity. It became doctrine. Modern classrooms still present Greece as the birthplace of Western civilization, while Africa is relegated to resources, slavery, and colonization, never to intellectual innovation. This is not oversight. It is the continuation of an erasure campaign crafted during the 18th and 19th centuries, when European empires needed to justify colonization. Colonial thinkers like Hegel declared Africa unhistorical, and these claims were elevated to academic law, shaping global education systems and providing ideological cover for imperial expansion. Europe could not claim to be bringing civilization to Africa while admitting that Africa created the foundations of that civilization. So they rewrote the story. They distorted timelines. They buried sources. They curated myths. And they built an academic structure dedicated to protecting this fiction at all costs. Scholars who challenge the narrative face extraordinary resistance. When Martin Bernal published Black Athena in 1987, documenting African influence on Greece, academia attacked him relentlessly. Sheikh Anta Diop, whose linguistics, anthropology, and archaeological studies proved Egypt's African identity and its influence on Greece, was systematically marginalized, despite impeccable methodology. Their treatment makes one thing unmistakably clear. This fight is not about history, it is about control. And the institutions guarding this myth will not surrender it willingly. The truth now stands in front of us, stripped of the stories that once concealed it. The foundation of what the world calls Western civilization rests on African intellectual achievement that predates Greek society by millennia. This reality doesn't diminish Greek contributions. It simply restores them to their rightful place as inheritors of an intellectual tradition that had already transformed mathematics, philosophy, architecture, and spiritual thought long before Athens took shape. Accepting this changes everything. It dismantles the myth of spontaneous miracles and reveals a long continuum of knowledge, passed, traded, adapted, and refined across cultures. And in that continuum, Africa is not a distant participant. Africa is the origin point, the architect, the source from which later civilizations drew their earliest ideas and systems of thought. The evidence has never been hidden. It lives in carved stone, in preserved papyri, in ancient engineering, in Greek writings themselves. The choice to ignore it, century after century, speaks not to gaps in history, but to the modern desire to protect a narrative built on comfort, not truth. If this revelation shakes you, let it, because what you've seen here is only the beginning. If the hidden African genius behind ancient Greece was kept in the shadows, what larger truth do you believe they're still terrified you'll uncover? Tell us in the comments, because now that this layer has been exposed, your perspective might reveal the next piece they never wanted uncovered. And if you're ready to keep going, make sure you watch the next video, because the deeper you go, the more the hidden pieces begin to surface, and the more the cracks in the official story start to widen. This story doesn't end here. It only opens the door to what comes next.